Well, welcome to a lecture on the Mediterranean diet. My name is Dr. Simon Poole, and it's been a great pleasure for me to have lectured on various aspects of the Mediterranean diet on Viking cruises in the past. And I'm very much looking forward to the next time that I'll be cruising with you sometime in 2022, where hopefully we can enjoy talking about the Mediterranean diet live, and obviously in the context of that on a Mediterranean cruise, enjoying all that fantastic food and enjoying the environment there in the Mediterranean, and talking about the benefits of this fantastic lifestyle and way of life. So I am a physician based in Cambridge in the UK, Cambridge, England, and I have spent many years advocating the Mediterranean diet to my patients, seen many incredible changes after patients have adopted the diet. People come back with better numbers, better blood pressures, better cholesterol levels, but perhaps even more importantly, just a greater sense of joie de vivre, a greater sense of enjoying their diet, enjoying their lifestyle, and enjoying what is the Mediterranean diet. So I hope to take you through some slides today to introduce you to the Mediterranean diet and ways of understanding it, of ways of really implementing it to gain all the benefits that science now shows that we can derive from such a healthy, nutritional lifestyle. And my first slide, the real Mediterranean diet, emphasizes that it's about actually discovering that some of the nuances, some of the subtleties, really digging deeper, because I think many people hear and know about the Mediterranean diet, but perhaps don't fully appreciate how to put it together. We often hear about it described in a few words of olive oil and nuts and perhaps fish and maybe vegetables and fruit, but then people begin to run out on ideas about how to really put the Mediterranean diet into practice. So the Mediterranean diet, first and foremost, is a diet that has been around for many millennia. So this is not a fad diet. This is not a diet that's here today and gone tomorrow. This is not the latest celebrity diet. This is a way of life, a nutritional pattern that has evolved over many years. It's a very natural way of life. It's very founded on the principles of a relationship with farming and a relationship with the land. And here's a beautiful picture of one of the destinations that Viking cruises might go to. This is in Jordan and borders with on the border with Israel and Palestine, and a beautiful setting where you see an olive grove in the context. And it's very much not only in a geographical context, but it's also in a historical context. These are ancient biblical lands where the olive tree has dated back for many thousands of years. And so just to look briefly at that historical context, we know now about the Mediterranean diet really since it was first described by Professor Ansel Keys in the 1950s and 60s, when he discovered that the traditional nutrition, the traditional dietary patterns in Greece and in southern Italy were associated with much better health outcomes than even in richer nations like the USA and like Northern Europe. And there was clearly something in the diet that was giving benefits to people living in that context. In fact, it was not a very rich diet, and it's been described as cucina povera, which in Italian is poor diet, financially poor, because people couldn't often afford some of the luxuries in their diet. So looking at that in the context prior to the times when it was first described by scientists in the 50s and 60s, really the birth of the Mediterranean diet, it comes along with the birth of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, in the lands of modern-day Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, where the first agriculture evolved. And the story of olive oil production goes hand in hand with the story of the Mediterranean diet. For over 6,000 years, there's been production of olive oil for nutrition, as well as for energy and for light source. Burning oil was a way to create light through oil lamps, but predominantly it was used as a food source. And so the Mediterranean diet, we'll see later on, is inseparable from olive oil, and we'll see how the diet goes together and fits together with the importance, the predominance of olive oil as part of that diet. But clearly it's historically been there, present in the Mediterranean for many, many thousands of years. And in fact, actually, the earliest harvesting of olives themselves, not necessarily for the oil, but perhaps for processing and for eating in the Levant area, can date back to the Neptunian period, which is more than 10,000 years ago. There's evidence of humans consuming olives as the fruit of the olive tree. So we see that the diet has really evolved over many millennia, and it continues to evolve. In fact, when we think about what we consider to be the modern day Mediterranean diet, it contains elements like herbs and spices, some of which have come from Asia, from India. Also includes things like coffee and chocolate, which were brought to the Mediterranean in the markets of the Mediterranean as the cultures of the Mediterranean traded and flourished, bringing things like chocolate from South America and coffee originally from Africa, and more recently tomatoes from the New World. And indeed it continues to evolve. So the Mediterranean diet is being introduced now to places in the more modern era, relatively modern, into the USA, into California, into the New World in the last 200 or 300 years, and it continues to evolve. Australia has its own olive oil crop, its own olive oil production, for example, and is continuing to evolve in the climates which are 40 degrees north and south of the parallel, where they can grow the vegetables and the fruits and also the olives, the wine of the Mediterranean. And there's been an ancient understanding of the relationship between nutrition and health. So although the Mediterranean diet is a relatively modern concept, if we look back at writings over the last several thousand years, we can see that early physicians were often relating to the importance of plants to health. There was an ancient Greek physician called Dioscorides, who was of Greek origin, but he was around at the early time of the Roman Empire, and he was a physician to the Roman army, and he would recommend regularly the earliest, bitterest olive oil for people with particular conditions. And it's now been shown that that oil is very rich in anti-inflammatories and antioxidant components. So maybe he knew a thing or two about the relationship between those antioxidants and health. And Hippocrates had over 60 medicinal recipes, which included olive oil, and of course other herbs and spices were considered to be good for health. So the relationship between food and the components and ingredients of the Mediterranean diet and health has been described alongside the Mediterranean diet over many thousands of years. And now we get to a stage where we can actually describe why what we understand to be the Mediterranean diet actually works for the benefit of health. And we're showing now that this ancient way of life, this ancient traditional way of preparing food, can be shown through modern science for the reasons why it can confer those health benefits. So just to touch base again on the original story about the evolution of the Mediterranean diet, and in particular olive oil and vegetables as a fundamental part of that with early agriculture. Here we see a couple of slides. One slide showing that Fertile Crescent where the beginnings of agriculture evolved. And also on another slide we see ancient Phoenicians in a mosaic crushing olives to produce olive oil. And the Phoenicians really were pivotal in the spread of the early Mediterranean diet, in the spread of olive oil. So these prodigious traders from what is now modern day Lebanon set sail and planted and brought trees to all of their various ports that they established around the coastal areas of the Mediterranean. So it was the Phoenicians, for example, who introduced the olive tree to Spain in 1000 BC, where now Spain is the largest producer of olive oil that we see in the world. So here we see the evolution and the migration of the olive tree as part of that early Mediterranean diet over the centuries. And again, we can see many ancient references, a photograph of an ancient olive press on the left, and a more modern day perspective, which is the olive tree that was planted on an ancient religious site as a symbol of peace by Pope John Paul a few decades ago. And the olive tree has always had a great importance, not only for its nutritional benefits, but it's been the symbol of many religions of peace and of fertility and of growth. So we know the olive tree in particular has been very, very present to nutrition and to civilizations over the last several thousand years. And we see now these fusion of cuisines in those trading areas in the Mediterranean, in the spice route, bringing spices from Asia and so on to produce some extraordinary Middle Eastern cuisine, which is one version of the Mediterranean diet, which of course has been described throughout the Mediterranean region. So fast forward to today, from those ancient times as the diet has evolved over many thousands of years. And it's now recognized that the Mediterranean diet is the gold standard diet, and it's a diet that's here to stay. Clearly, as I said at the outset of the talk, it's not a fad diet. It's not something that's here today and gone tomorrow. And the US News, who set up a committee of world-renowned nutritional experts, has voted the Mediterranean diet to be the best diet overall for the last 4 years. And it also wins accolades as best diet for diabetes and for many other illnesses. And in fact, it is a recipe for wellness. So there is no single diet that not only achieves weight reduction when that's wanted, but it also reduces a whole host of other chronic diseases. And when we consider that 70 to 80% of chronic diseases are, at least in a majority part, contributed to by lifestyle choices, we know that if we can prevent these many chronic diseases, we can make for a much healthier society and much healthier individuals. So the Mediterranean diet has been shown to reduce the risk of heart disease, of stroke, of obesity, reduce the risk of diabetes, cancers, even dementias, and reducing early death. Interestingly, it's also been shown that it improves markers of well-being. So whilst it's difficult to measure well-being scientifically, when people are asked to report how they're feeling in terms of their sense of wellness, their sense of energy, slightly intangible things to measure by science, but people certainly report feeling so much better when they're taking the Mediterranean diet. And I certainly see this in practice. So when people are understanding and engaging with the Mediterranean diet and enjoying it, they will feel better as well. And I think it's probably appropriate just to pause and also just bring it up to the very modern times and think about what we've learned from the pandemic, this terrible disease that has blighted the world for the last couple of years. I mean, I think we've learned a couple of things from it. I think the first thing is that those people who've sadly been so devastated by the illness have been people who have often had chronic diseases, whether that's high blood pressure or obesity or heart disease or stroke or diabetes. Unfortunately, there is a much more severe illness associated from COVID-19 when these chronic conditions are carried. Now, the good news is that actually many of these chronic conditions are those conditions that can be prevented by the Mediterranean diet. And what is quite remarkable about the Mediterranean diet is that there is now some scientific evidence that if we put people on the diet and if people adhere to the diet very closely, we can reduce the risk of developing diabetes in a matter of weeks rather than a matter of years. We can reduce inflammatory elements in the diet almost in a matter of hours or days. So it's really important as we are in this pandemic to think that what we eat today really does matter. And these are 3 slides of some studies which have been looking at the Mediterranean diet, not just in terms of preventing those chronic diseases, which we know cause people so much risk with COVID, but actually some of the thought behind whether or not if you're have COVID-19 adhering to the Mediterranean diet might be in some way protective. Now, we have to be careful about saying that we can adopt a diet that protects us from COVID-19, but there is some early evidence that it can make some difference at least. So, for example, it can reduce the tendency to blood clot, which is one of the consequences, one of the complications of COVID-19. So, although we can't necessarily prescribe a diet and say this will prevent or cure COVID, we can say that diet may be playing a part, may have a part to play in prevention of the most severe forms of COVID-19. So what is the Mediterranean diet? Well, that's a good question, because many people can name a few ingredients, but perhaps don't fully understand the Mediterranean diet as a whole. And here is an illustration from my friends at Old Ways, based in Boston, Massachusetts, who have described the Mediterranean diet in a pyramid. So these are the kind of foods that we can be consuming on a regular basis at the bottom of the pyramid, and perhaps on an occasional basis at the top. So vegetables, whole grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices, very much part of the everyday. Fish and seafood, quite commonly consumed, and poultry and eggs and so on, with red meat and sweets and certainly added sugars much less frequently consumed. And of course, the word diet, well, in our modern day parlance, stands for dare I eat that. Actually, diet really derives from the ancient Greek word dieta, which means way of living, way of life. And illustrated at the bottom of the pyramid is the fact that the Mediterranean diet is part of a healthy lifestyle, of active, of communal eating, of enjoying food, celebrating food, and celebrating it as part of a healthy lifestyle. And to some extent, enjoying food, valuing it, knowing what we're eating, understanding about taste is all part of that Mediterranean experience. And it's been shown that all of that tends to, for example, reduce the amount of calories we consume, reduce the quantity of food we're consuming, almost in an intangible way, just through communal eating. We tend to eat a more healthy diet, and more in moderation. So how do we explain this in modern understanding? Well, I think we know that the Mediterranean diet can rise above what I call the macronutrient food fight. So we've seen decades where we've been talking about low carb or low fat. We've been talking about paleo diets as a way to consume particular types of protein. Well, although macronutrients are, of course, the largest quantity of foods we eat, none of us actually eat just carbohydrates. So sometimes when people are on a very low carbohydrate diet, the question is, well, do you eat vegetables? Because of course vegetables are carbohydrates. So what people mean when they talk about low carbohydrate diets, I think, is that they're actually reducing added sugars, which of course just makes sense, to drink less soda and to reduce your added sugar. So I think these arguments about carbs and fats are probably limited in what they can achieve. If we look at the Mediterranean diet, it's a whole diet. So it comes together with low glycemic, high quality carbs. So those are the kind of carbohydrates which have an association with a low sugar rise, which is much more healthy than the high sugar rises when we have very simple sugars consumed. Those high rises, those peaks and those troughs of sugar that are associated with modern high sugar diets tend to lead towards obesity and diabetes. So good quality whole grain carbs with those sugars stored within the grain it's got unrefined sugars, and that's the quality of carbohydrates we're talking about. And that increases insulin sensitivity. Now, insulin is the hormone that drives the way in which we handle these peaks and troughs of sugar. And it's been known that the ingredients of the Mediterranean diet improve the response of insulin, so reduce our risk of becoming obese and developing diabetes. With regards to the fats, there are low levels of saturated fat, which have been associated with rises in cholesterol. So overall, it's a low saturated fat. Although when saturated fats are consumed, for example, in dairy, for example, in cheese and yogurt, they tend to be high quality saturated fats. And so, for example, saturated fats of sheep and goat's cheese are better quality saturated fats, better, healthier fats in terms of their effect on cholesterol than from full fat cow dairy, the kind of full fats that we tend to, the saturated fat that we tend to consume in the West. It's got high monounsaturated fats. Those are the fats in extra virgin olive oil. It's got high omega-3 polyunsaturated fats. These are the fats that we see in oily fish and also some green vegetables. So it improves cholesterol profiles with those fat and carbohydrate qualities. It's got high quality proteins. And what we mean by that is that the proteins are often from vegetable sources or from plant sources at least, so from beans rather than necessarily a large quantity of red meat. Lots and lots of vegetables a day. It's low salt and it's very rich in antioxidant and anti-inflammatory minerals and vitamins, as we'll see later. And it really works as a dietary pattern because food is more than the macronutrients we consume. Food contains many other micronutrients, as we've seen, vitamins, minerals, and we'll talk about some really interesting compounds called polyphenols in a while. It's the quality of food that counts. So often foods will come from local markets, they'll be homegrown, and we can see that levels of antioxidants, particularly in naturally grown foods, can be much higher than in industrially produced foods. It's associated with a healthy weight maintenance. As we've touched on, it's about the lifestyle, about community, about eating together, about celebrating food. We're now beginning to understand that it has a very positive effect on our gut microbes. We're really realizing and understanding how those microbes that live in our gut, which are so important to us, which we live in some symbiosis with, are really, really helped and supported by a Mediterranean diet rich in things like vegetables and extra virgin olive oil. And we've now even showing that the Mediterranean diet can affect the way in which our genes are expressed. We used to think that our DNA really dictated the patterns that we lived in the same way that the fates in ancient Greek mythology decided what was going to happen to Odysseus, and there was not much he could do about it. But we're now understanding that actually diet can influence the way in which our genes are actually expressed, so that in fact they can turn off bad genes and increase the expression of genes that are protective. We know that food combinations are important, so that foods interact together when they come together to form meals. So again, in isolation, just talking about perhaps carbs or fats is not very useful when they come together and join. And we'll explore some of the interesting food combinations which make food more healthy when we talk about putting the Mediterranean diet together a little bit later in the lecture. The great thing about the Mediterranean diet is that it's really positive nutrition. So it's not talking about what you can't eat. It's actually talking about the wonderful ingredients that make up the Mediterranean diet, the wonderful herbs and spices, the wonderful colorful vegetables, the wonderful tasting extra virgin olive oil that really make up this fantastic diet. And I think that's a wonderful thing. When we see people who adhere to diets, people on the Mediterranean diet have a much greater tendency to stick to the diet in the long term because they're enjoying it. It's a plant-based diet, which is good for the planet and good for health. And this extra virgin olive oil, absolutely central to the diet, which we'll see a little bit later on in the talk. There are opportunities with the Mediterranean diet, and not only that, but actually it's actually a matter of public health. So slides here showing epidemiological studies which are actually looking then forwards and mapping what kind of preventative measures, what we could prevent by improving people's diet. And it's been shown that eating more of a Mediterranean diet could prevent as many as 20,000 UK deaths. 19,000 was in this newspaper article per year if people in the UK adhered more to Mediterranean diets. And then Food and Nutrition Research published a study which showed that in the state, many billions of dollars could be saved from the annual healthcare budget in North America if people moved to a much more Mediterranean diet because of the prevention of cardiovascular disease in this case, but also other inflammatory and other conditions like dementia and so on. So extra virgin olive oil production and consumption is also really important in terms of planetary survival, in terms of sustainability. We see on one of the slides, we see an environmental pyramid put against a food pyramid. So in other words, this describes the various foods and their impact on the environment. And we can see that the food pyramid, which is associated with much better, much more sustainable agriculture with less greenhouse gas production, is a food pyramid such as the one on the left, which mirrors very much the Mediterranean diet, which is low in industrial refined products, really high in plant-based vegetable, with only occasional red meat consumption. That's not to say it's excluded, but occasional red meat consumption is certainly better for the planet than the types of quantity that we're eating at the moment. And olive oil production itself actually gives back to the environment more than it takes. So the olive tree itself producing olive oil is a very sustainable way, even when you take into account the fact that many parts of the world don't have an olive oil production, and so the olive oil has to be transported. Even after taking that into account, it's been shown that actually the olive tree sinks more carbon than the production of olive oil consumes. So we'll look at extra virgin olive oil now in a little bit more detail. It certainly is fundamental to the Mediterranean diet. So wherever we go around the Mediterranean, whichever regional version of the Mediterranean diet we describe, there are always two fundamental components, which are vegetables and extra virgin olive oil. So we might travel, and we're looking forward to the days where we can travel quite literally on a Viking cruise around the Mediterranean, and we can sample different cuisines from Spain, where they might have a lot of tomatoes, perhaps France with a preponderance of garlic on the southern French coast, Italy with particular cheeses, Greece with lots of extra virgin olive oil and other ingredients, and North Africa and Turkey with lots of herbs and spices, consuming in tagine cooking. So there'll be different types, but fundamentally it's often extra virgin olive oil and vegetables which really are considered to be the common denominator in all these various regional expressions of the Mediterranean diet. So in fact, one might look at a dietary pyramid like this, a Mediterranean pyramid like this, and one might say that actually olive oil is at its heart, and this may be a better representation than the old ways pyramid in terms of expressing the central role of extra virgin olive oil. And in fact, my publisher likes me to mention my book, The Olive Oil Diet, now translated into several languages, which really describes the Mediterranean diet from a perspective of extra virgin olive oil. And extra virgin olive oil effects are really inseparable, and they are considerable, and we can even individually measure the effect of this extremely important ingredients. And that is quite challenging because identifying a particular ingredient and associating health benefits from that individual ingredients are really challenging for nutritional science. Nutritional science is challenging enough when one's trying to look and separate out all the noise in the scientific studies, all the confounding and confusing factors. But extra virgin olive oil has been shown to be really important in preventing strokes, in contributing to the Mediterranean diet as a way to reduce heart disease, cancers, and forms of dementia. And really that shouldn't surprise us, because in this slide it shows the scoring that scientists apply to the various ingredients of the Mediterranean diet, and really extra virgin olive oil, regular consumption, each meal counts as highly as the regular consumption of fruit and vegetables. So scientists are considering olive oil to be a very fundamental part of the measurement of the scoring of people's adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And we only have to look at this charming gentleman from Crete, and we know intuitively that he is putting extra virgin olive oil on every dish, that it is swimming in extra virgin olive oil. And in fact, if you look at the traditional diet of Crete, it was said that as much as 40% of calories come from extra virgin from fats, and as much as 80% of that 40%, so as much as 80% of the fat calories derive from extra virgin olive oil. So no single ingredient is so important in any diet in the world in terms of the quantity in which it's consumed in comparison with other individual ingredients. And here are some studies which show that that effect of extra virgin olive oil. So there was a large study in Bordeaux showing a 78% difference in risk of stroke between low and high EVU consumptions. EVU is the modern parlance for extra virgin olive oil, and showing a reduction in stroke, a really very significant reduction in stroke, apparently between those people who are consuming the largest amount of extra virgin olive oil. And similarly, a study in 2012, the very large EPIC study, showed that the regular consumption of 20 mils of extra virgin olive oil halved the risk of heart disease in an association, and reduced the all-cause mortality, that's cause of death, by 26%. And we can go on and we can cite other studies where the regular consumption of extra virgin olive oil inherent to the Mediterranean diet reduces the risk of diabetes by as much as 50%, of some breast cancers by 60%, and there's further evidence showing how extra virgin olive oil might contribute to lowering blood pressure, perhaps reducing the risk of blood clots, and reducing inflammation and so on. So we're going to talk a little bit about extra virgin olive oil now and show that the science is beginning to emerge. The science of extra virgin olive oil is quite interesting. It's quite profoundly chemical, and there are lots of complicated chemical formulae that I won't show you today. But it essentially is a fat, to a large extent, a very healthy fat, but it also contains what are called minor constituents, which are vitamins and antioxidants in particular, which probably have a disproportionately important, disproportionately high influence in terms of their health benefits. So we know that it is a monounsaturated fat, which is a healthy fat which improves our cholesterol profile. It's stable to heat. It helps us feel satisfied during a meal, so we'll reduce the overall calorie consumption in a meal if we add extra virgin olive oil. So although it contains quite a lot of calories as a fat, it tends to make us satisfied earlier in a meal. And it helps to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin D, vitamin A, and in particular people in northern climes are very likely to be perhaps deficient on vitamin D, but extra virgin olive oil helps the absorption of vitamin D in the diet. But actually, it's the unique antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds that we call polyphenols, which probably are even more influential in the benefits of extra virgin olive oil. So we know that these compounds reduce harmful oxidation and inflammation, and therefore probably reduce the risk of heart disease and cancers by means of that antioxidant effect and those anti-inflammatory effects. So in the last section, we're going to talk a little bit about these components called polyphenols, these chemicals which have been relatively recently discovered in extra virgin olive oil, but which seem to have very profound antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. I call them the most interesting things that you eat that no one has heard of. And I think when we talk about nutrition moving forwards, I think there'll be even more interest in these fascinating compounds, which have these quite profound effects within our bodies. So it's important to understand that polyphenols are, first and foremost, they're aromatic chemicals that occur naturally in plants. Plants make them. We'll see in a little while why they make them. There are more than 500 unique polyphenols, although some places you can read that there are many thousands of polyphenols. It depends on whether you subgroup some of them, but certainly there are a lot of polyphenols, and they're known as phytochemicals because they're produced by plants. So they probably have their effects on human nutrition through powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. And that's through scavenging free radicals. So in this process, the antioxidant transfers an electron to neutralize the free radical, thereby preventing the chain reactions such as lipid peroxidation. Now, to translate that into lay terms, essentially free radicals are very reactive molecules, very reactive atoms which have the capability of damaging cells. They damage cells by seeking to steal electrons from other chemicals that we have, in particular cell walls within our body. And polyphenols are very generous donators of these electrons. So polyphenols can, in our diet, quench the thirst of these free radicals, which are ever present in our world, either as toxins or as byproducts of metabolism. And the polyphenols that we consume are very capable of neutralizing, potentially damaging, oxidizing chemicals within our body and within our environment. In fact, polyphenols are produced by plants rather elegantly. They produce them themselves to protect themselves from oxygen, which is a highly reactive molecule. Oxygen obviously produces the kind of energy that we need to work, and oxygen as an atom, as I say, is very, very highly reactive. It causes inflammation, and the polyphenols can protect the plant from those oxidation processes, and can also protect the plant from microbial attack and from destruction. So they're a protective mechanism for the plant that we can then use to protect our bodies from some of the risks of oxidation and inflammation. One of the fascinating areas, I think, which is just beginning to be explored, is that polyphenols often have a certain taste, which means that we can actually taste the amount of antioxidants that we can consume in our foods. And this is really interesting because it means that actually we can see often the polyphenols are colored, and often they have a particular taste, so that we can taste the polyphenols and derive health and know what we're eating is potentially doing ourselves some good. So there are some unique and abundant polyphenols in the fruit of the olive tree. The olive tree is an example of a tree that has to produce fruit in a really challenging environment. It's an arid environment, it's a hot environment, lots of UV light, and so the olive tree responds by producing some very powerful polyphenols in the olive to protect the olive from going bad, from being oxidized, from going rancid, from the fats breaking down through that process of oxidation in the environment. And it's these polyphenols that can be shown to have some protective effect on the oxidative stress, these oxidative processes of free radicals that we can see in our bodies. So these are really nature's natural medicines, and they have many effects. So the polyphenols that you can see illustrated in this slide, often in the colors. So these vegetables will be very, very rich in different polyphenols. The purple colors often contain polyphenols we call procyanidins. The onions, polyphenols we call quercetin, and there are many of these polyphenols which exist and have very protective effect. And there's been some early research showing that they possibly have not only antioxidant effects, but also they anti-thrombotic, which means that they reduce the risk of clots, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, so there may be some element in fighting off disease, they're anti-cancer and protective of our nervous systems. They can help and support our immune system and protect our heart from potential damage through free radicals and through oxidative stress in their antioxidant effects. So really these polyphenols, I think, are going to be of increasing interest. And if you wanted to identify a single diet that was really rich in polyphenols, it would be the Mediterranean diet, rich in its colorful vegetables and rich in its extra virgin olive oil. And so we can talk a little bit about oxidation and antioxidants. We can talk about inflammation for good or for bad. And essentially oxidation, which is this process by which a highly reactive molecule, high reactive atom will be released to produce some inflammation, can be part of the protective effect. And these are just two slides showing that our immune system is capable of producing free radicals to actually combat disease. So produce oxidative bursts of oxidation to destroy infecting bacteria. So we use, in a controlled way, these free radicals, essentially, oxidation processes to destroy bacteria that might invade. But having said that, oxidation itself can be damaging. So we look, for example, at an apple, which on its outer surface contains many polyphenols to protect it. As soon as you open it up with the lower levels of polyphenols in the flesh, the oxidation processes begin to break down the products, the nutrition within an apple. And so imagine that effect without the protection of polyphenols. So free radicals are around us. They're around us from pollution. They're around us from UV light can produce free radicals. Inflammation can produce free radicals, particularly if it's uncontrolled. Our metabolism itself byproducts can produce these highly reactive atoms and molecules, smoking and radiation. So the formation of free radicals, which can result in tissue damage, result in cell damage, and even result in DNA damage, which can be a precursor of risk of cancer, we can potentially reverse by quenching the reactivity of these free radicals through the protective effects of consuming polyphenols. Here's another slide which just shows how the antioxidant molecule, perhaps a polyphenol, can donate an electron to a free radical, which then stabilizes it, prevents it from seeking an electron from another atom, another molecule, perhaps that is protecting our bodies, perhaps part of a cell wall or so and so on. So antioxidants in our diet are thought to be very important. A cartoon just demonstrating this in an easier way, showing that showing in a quite amusing way the fact that these vegetables can protect us from potentially harmful oxidizing free radicals. We also know, very interestingly, that inflammation, acute inflammation, of course, is part of the protection from an incursion by a virus or a bacteria. But we know that chronic inflammation can unfortunately lead to chronic diseases. And we can see that actually chronic inflammation, which is associated with an excess of free radicals, an excess of oxidation, can lead to damaging illnesses. But what's really interesting is that it can be shown that if you consume a diet rich in polyphenols, rich in these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant components, that actually you can decrease the amount of inflammation. So this slide, which shows just a small sample, but this has been repeated on larger groups of people. This shows how people who were taken as a scientific study, they had antioxidant. They had a diet which is very low in antioxidants for a day or two, and then they were served a meal of sofrito, which is a beautiful recipe which, when we travel around the Mediterranean, we can sample in local cafes. Beautiful sofrito, which consists of tomatoes, onions, garlic, and extra virgin olive oil. They consumed a high polyphenol, high antioxidant diet, and when looked at markers of inflammation, chemicals which can show us how much inflammation is going on in somebody's body, these were dramatically reduced just even after one meal of an antioxidant, polyphenol, anti-inflammatory rich meal of sofrito. These markers of inflammation reduced in a matter of hours. So it shows that what we eat today can actually influence the levels, these markers of inflammation in our blood, and the levels of inflammation that perhaps are a risk factor for chronic diseases. And again, it's been shown that extra virgin olive oil by itself can have that effect. So consuming extra virgin olive oil, we can show immediately afterwards, we can show much improved function of the blood vessels, with decrease in inflammation and decrease in these chemical markers, in this case markers which we don't need to know any about in any detail, but CRP, interleukins, TNF are all markers of inflammation, and they can be shown to be reduced after a meal rich in extra virgin olive oil, which then goes on, it's felt, to reduce the risk of heart disease, stroke, and so on. So just to touch briefly on the secret stories of the science of extra virgin olive oil, we now know that extra virgin olive oil is an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. We know that it increases sensitivity of insulin. So that means that it has an effect on insulin to make it work harder, to reduce the risks of diabetes and obesity. We know that it can suppress the absorption of sugar. So when you think about the glycemic load, the amount of sugar that's released from a meal, consuming it with extra virgin olive oil will reduce that spike in sugar. So whenever we go to the Middle East, for example, and have some flatbread, a carbohydrate, of course we'll have it drizzled in extra virgin olive oil. Whenever we go to Italy and we have some pasta, it wouldn't be dreamt to be served without extra virgin olive oil. And that is a way perhaps to reduce the glycemic load of a meal. It increases satisfaction. There's an interesting combination of nitrates in plants, which when combined with extra virgin olive oil has been shown to lower blood pressure. The antioxidants in extra virgin olive oil actually protect the oil at temperature. So it's a myth that you can't cook in extra virgin olive oil. It's been shown that actually those antioxidants protect the oil from degradation at temperature. It protects meat from the formation of potential carcinogens, so potential cancer-causing compounds. So these compounds called heterocyclic amines are reduced if we cook red meat with extra virgin olive oil. So always marinate, always prepare your meat with that protective extra virgin olive oil. Omega-3s in fish we know are very sensitive to fish. These are to heat. So when we fry fish, we fry them in extra virgin olive oil, and that protects the omega-3s, these very heat-sensitive fats, from breakdown and preserves them and allows our body to use them more efficiently. When we combine together with vegetables extra virgin olive oil, we increase the availability of those fat-soluble antioxidants. So the combination of the extra virgin olive oil with the vegetables will increase the absorption of many of those anti-inflammatory and antioxidant components. And so we need to make sure that we look after our extra virgin olive oil, that we have the best. It's important to have extra virgin olive oil with a low acidity because that denotes the freshness of the oil. We can understand and learn about the variety of extra virgin olive oil, which has various different olives can go through to produce the final product. It's important to understand a little bit about the processing and about the time of the harvest, because the earliest we harvest the olive oil, often the higher it is in these antioxidants. Altitude and irrigation and the way in which it's cultivated and the way in which it's stored will also have an influence on how powerful the antioxidants are, how these levels of polyphenol, anti-inflammatory and antioxidants are preserved. And when we go on some of the cruises, there's an opportunity to see olive oil being produced, and the olive oil producer will often go through these ways of producing very fine, high quality, high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil. And the key thing is that we can actually learn to taste extra virgin olive oil. And again, this is something that can be experienced on a Viking cruise, to experience extra virgin olive oil and to understand that the taste denotes the polyphenol levels. So tastes which are slightly bitter, slightly pungent, slightly peppery provide a very high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil. And these are the list of the chemicals, which are these polyphenols, which denote that taste. So it's important to choose our extra virgin olive oil for its high level of polyphenols on the taste level. And finally, we can talk about three of these anti-inflammatory polyphenols just very briefly. So we have antioxidants in extra virgin olive oil, which include vitamin E. There are also anti-inflammatory components called squalene and lignans. But we can talk about three unique polyphenols to extra virgin olive oil: oleopurin, oleocanthal, and hydroxytyrosol. So these are their chemical formulae. So oleocanthal is a polyphenol which has been shown to decrease inflammation and has also been shown to, in the test tube at least, inhibit the division of cancer cells. And oleocanthal will give that stinging cough sensation at the back of a very good extra virgin olive oil. Tyrosols are polyphenols which have been shown to reduce the risk of oxidation of LDL cholesterol. And here in a graph is a visual of the risk of when cholesterol is oxidized, how that risk tracks to the risk of heart disease. And we've shown that if we decrease the oxidation of LDL cholesterol through these polyphenols, in particular one called tyrosol in extra virgin olive oil, which gives a particularly bitter sensation to the oil, a pleasant bitterness when combined with food, reduces the risk of that coronary artery disease. And in fact, the European Food Safety Authority have produced a scientific opinion which allows extra virgin olive oil producers to say on their label if it contains a particularly high level of these polyphenols. So look out for that description on a bottle of extra virgin olive oil. And here is scan results for mice which were sadly bred to be slightly susceptible to Alzheimer's disease, a form in mice, a form of dementia, and some were untreated and some were fed oleopurin, which is a unique polyphenol to extra virgin olive oil. And the scans showed the level of damage in the brain to these poor unfortunate mice, those that were untreated versus those that were treated with the oleopurin, showing that the preservation of the brain tissue was much better in those who'd had the addition of the oleopurin. So this was also tracked in terms of their behavior to show that actually feeding mice with extra virgin olive oil components can potentially prevent a decline in their cognition, which may be able to be translated across to humans. We're not sure about that yet, but certainly the Mediterranean diet, we know, can be play an important part in potentially preventing Alzheimer's, and so maybe this is one of the reasons why that might be the case. We need to talk briefly about extra virgin olive oil in the kitchen. Essentially, it's very safe to cook in extra virgin olive oil. Here are some graphs of cooking for, in fact, up to 2 hours with extra virgin olive oil, and it shows that the formation of harmful trans fats, with EVO on the one side being the lowest in comparison with other oils like sunflower, coconut, grapeseed, etc. And the antioxidants, most importantly, in the oils at the end of that cooking process were very rich in the extra virgin olive oil. So really, it's important to cook and to prepare and to drizzle with extra virgin olive oil. So bringing extra virgin olive oil together with the Mediterranean diet in the ways that we've described, recognizing the importance not only of those macronutrients, the good quality carbohydrates and fats and proteins, but also looking at the polyphenols in the plants and vegetables, along with the extra virgin olive oil, is really, I think, a key to understanding what is the real Mediterranean diet, that we're just beginning to reveal some of the most important scientific secrets. And so with that, and a look at my latest book cover, I'll leave you hoping to see you on a cruise where we can actually not only understand and learn more about the Mediterranean diet, but actually enjoy it in the context of that wonderful environment.